In the heart of a dusty little village called Mbali lived a tiny girl named Zola. She was just 7 years old, with the purest heart and the sweetest smile that could melt even the coldest soul. But life had been cruel to her. After her beloved father passed away, Zola was left all alone in the hands of her stepmother, Tendai, a woman whose heart was harder than stone. Every day, the villagers would see Zola walking barefoot through the rough paths, her big sad eyes staring down at the ground. While other children played in the fields, laughing and chasing each other, Zola was always working, sweeping floors, carrying heavy buckets, cleaning dirty pots. No one ever heard her complain. No one ever heard her laugh. She just kept going, like a little broken bird trying to survive a storm. Deep inside her tiny chest, Zola carried only one dream. Not riches, not toys, not grand things, just a small, desperate wish to be loved once more, the way her father used to hold her close and tell her she mattered. Every morning, long before the sun touched the sky, little Zola's day would begin. While the village still slept peacefully, she was already awake, her tiny hands busy with endless work. The first task was to sweep the dusty yard, her bare feet dragging over sharp stones that cut into her soft skin. After that, she had to fetch heavy buckets of water from the faraway well, a journey that left her arms trembling and her back aching. The buckets were almost as big as she was, but she had no choice. She had to do it, no matter how tired or weak she felt. Then came washing the dirty clothes, scrubbing them until her fingers turned red and sore. After that, she would be made to cook, stirring hot pots over smoking fires, coughing and wiping tears from her eyes because of the smoke. Zola was only 7 years old, but her days were harder than those of grown men. While other children of the village were waking up to their mother's songs and warm breakfasts, Zola faced only harsh orders and cruel glares. She never had enough food to eat. Some days, Tendai would throw her a dry, stale crust of bread or leftover scraps that even dogs would sniff and walk away from. Meanwhile, Tendai and her real daughters sat at the table, laughing and eating plates full of steaming rice, tender meat, and juicy fruits. They didn't even glance at Zola, who sat in a dark corner, pretending not to notice the delicious smells that made her empty stomach twist in pain. Her clothes were another silent proof of her suffering. While Tendai's daughters wore bright, clean dresses with colourful beads and shiny shoes, Zola was forced to wear the same torn, dirty dress every day. It hung loosely on her thin frame, patched badly in places, ripped open in others. She had no shoes to protect her feet from the rough paths of the village. Every step she took was a new wound, a fresh scar. Her heels were cracked and bleeding, her toes swollen from constant bruising. Yet no one seemed to care, and Zola had learned not to cry about it. Tears only brought more punishment. There were no toys for Zola, no dolls, no skipping ropes, no little gifts that other children got. There were no bedtime stories either, no warm arms to tuck her into bed or kiss her forehead goodnight. Instead, Zola's nights were filled with the sound of Tendai's voice yelling out orders, the slam of doors, and sometimes the painful sting of punishment. If Zola had missed even a small chore, she slept on a thin, itchy mat in the corner of the kitchen, curled up tightly to keep herself warm against the cold night. Every day, Zola carried an invisible weight on her small shoulders, a heavy sadness that no one saw and no one wanted to. Her life was a long, endless circle of work, hunger, hurt, and loneliness. Sometimes she would look outside the window and see the other village children running barefoot under the sun, laughing freely, their faces shining with happiness. A tiny part of her heart still hoped that maybe, just maybe, one day she too would laugh like that again. But as each harsh day passed and each cold night fell, that hope grew smaller, fading like a dying flame. Yet even through all the misery, Zola kept going. She carried her sadness quietly, like a little warrior no one noticed, surviving in a world that seemed to have forgotten her completely. The sky was heavy that evening, dark clouds rolling across the village, bringing a chill in the air and a sadness that seemed to soak into the ground. Rain began to fall in thick, cold drops, tapping on the roofs and turning the dusty roads into rivers of mud. Inside Tendai's house, Zola moved as quickly as her tired little body would allow. Her hands were numb from the cold, her legs sore from a day filled with endless work. She had been ordered to prepare water for cooking, something she had done many times before. But today, Her arms felt weaker than ever. As she tried to lift the heavy clay pot filled with water, her small hands slipped. Time seemed to slow. The pot crashed to the ground, shattering into pieces, and the clean water spilled across the floor, mixing with the dirt and dust. For a moment, silence filled the house, heavier than the rain outside. Zola froze, her heart pounding painfully in her chest. She knew the pot was important. She knew it belonged to Tendai's mother and had been passed down for generations. She also knew what would happen next. Before she could even step back, Tendai stormed into the room, her face twisted with a rage that Zola had never seen before. Without a single word, she raised her hand and slapped Zola so hard across the face that the little girl stumbled backward, almost falling into the puddle of broken pottery. The sharp sting on her cheek burned worse than any wound she had ever felt. "You cursed child!" Tendai screamed, her voice louder than the storm outside. "Ever since you came into my life, nothing but bad luck has followed me. You bring misfortune to everyone around you." Her words were like knives, cutting deeper than the slap. Zola didn't defend herself. She didn't cry out or beg for forgiveness. She simply stood there, her small frame shaking, her bare feet cold against the wet floor. Her big, brown eyes filled with tears, but they didn't fall from her cheeks. They simply pooled there, blurring the cruel face of the woman towering over her. Above them, the broken roof leaked badly, letting rainwater drip into the house. The drops landed on Zola's hair, her shoulders, and her tiny hands. But she didn't move. She didn't wipe them away. She just stood frozen, feeling smaller and more invisible with each passing second. Every cruel word Tendai threw at her made her shrink further into herself. She wanted to disappear. She wished she could melt into the floor or be carried away by the wind outside. Anything to escape the hateful eyes staring down at her. The shattered clay pot lay around her like broken pieces of her own heart, and the mess on the floor looked just like her life, ruined, messy, and impossible to fix. She had tried so hard. Every day she worked until her hands bled, until her knees buckled. Yet, it was never enough. One small mistake, one moment of weakness, and everything came crashing down, just like that clay pot. And there was no one to hold her, no one to tell her it was okay, no one to say she was just a little girl doing her best. The rain outside grew heavier, thundering against the ground. Inside the house, the storm inside Tendai's heart was even fiercer, and in the middle of it all stood Zola, silent, soaking wet, heartbroken, a tiny flower trying to survive a world that only seemed to want to crush her. Tendai's anger did not cool. It burned hotter with every second, like a wildfire that could not be stopped. Without thinking, without a hint of mercy, she reached out and grabbed Zola's tiny arm. Her fingers dug deep into the little girl's skin, making her wince in pain. But Zola didn't fight back. She was too used to this kind of treatment. Tendai dragged her roughly across the muddy floor, ignoring the soft gasps that escaped Zola's lips. The ground was wet and slippery from the leaking rain, and Zola stumbled, her bare feet scraping against the rough dirt. But Tendai didn't care. She reached the heavy wooden door, flung it open wide, and in one violent motion, pushed Zola out into the storm. The cold hit Zola like a slap. It was so sharp, so cruel, that she could barely catch her breath. Her thin, torn dress offered no protection against the freezing rain that poured down from the black sky. She had no shoes, no shawl, not even a scrap of cloth to wrap herself in, just her little broken body, standing in the mud, trembling so hard her knees almost buckled. Before she could even turn around to plead, to whisper a cry for help, the door behind her slammed shut with a loud, final thud that echoed through the night. She was alone. The rain showed no mercy. It soaked her hair, her dress, her skin, making her feel like she was sinking into the earth itself. The mud pulled at her tiny feet as she tried to move, slipping and sliding, her toes freezing and raw. Every drop that hit her face felt like a stone. Every gust of wind tore through her bones. The night was alive with noise, the roar of thunder, the crack of lightning slicing across the dark sky, but no one heard her. No one came running to see why a little girl was standing outside, alone in the storm. Zola hugged herself tightly, trying to stay warm, but it was useless. Her arms were too thin, her body too weak. The cold wrapped around her like an icy chain, and her small teeth chattered uncontrollably. She didn't know where to go. She didn't know what to do. She was just a child, abandoned by the only family she had left. Her heart pounded with fear. What if wild animals came out of the dark? What if she got lost in the storm and no one ever found her again? Every second felt like an hour as she stood there, shivering and helpless, the storm howling around her. Her mind raced with thoughts, memories of her father's warm arms, his gentle songs, his promises that he would always protect her. But those memories only made the cold feel worse, made the loneliness dig deeper. The village around her was silent, windows shuttered tight against the storm, fires burning safely inside where other children were tucked into warm beds. Zola had no fire, no blanket, no home. She took a shaky step forward, then another, her feet sinking into the thick mud. The world blurred in front of her eyes, rain mixing with tears she didn't even realize were falling. She was too small for this fight, too fragile to survive this kind of cold. But there was no choice. She had been thrown out by the only person who should have cared for her, banished by her own blood, left to face a night that wanted nothing more than to swallow her whole. Zola stumbled through the dark village paths, her small body shaking with cold and fear. Her arms wrapped tightly around herself, but it did little to keep the freezing wind away. The rain poured harder, soaking her thin dress until it clung to her tiny frame like a second, icy skin. Every step she took sent sharp pain shooting up her legs as the rough stones and thorns hidden in the muddy ground cut into her bare feet. Blood mixed with mud, but she kept walking because she didn't know what else to do. She was too young to understand where to go or how to find safety. All she knew was that she had to keep moving, even if every step felt like walking through a nightmare. Her soft cries were lost in the roar of the storm. She didn't scream. She didn't call out. Somewhere deep inside, Zola had already learned that no one would come if she did. Her sobs were small, broken sounds, carried away by the wild wind. Every gust of cold air sliced through her wet dress like knives, making her shiver so hard her teeth rattled. Her tiny hands were numb, her cheeks stung by the cold rain, and her heart ached with a loneliness too big for someone so small. After what felt like forever, Zola spotted something ahead through the sheets of rain, an old, broken wooden cart lying near the edge of a field. It wasn't much, but it was better than standing in the open, exposed to the furious night. With the last bit of strength left in her, she crawled underneath it, dragging her soaked dress behind her. The space was cramped and smelled of wet wood and old earth, but she didn't care. She pulled her knees up to her chest, hugging them tightly, trying to make herself as small as possible. Her head rested on her knees, her tangled hair falling over her face like a curtain. There, under that broken cart, Zola cried quietly, the tears running down her cheeks, mixing with the rain that still dripped from above. She cried for her father, for the home she lost, for the love she missed. She cried because she was just a child, and the world had already shown her its cruelest side. The night around her stayed merciless, the thunder rumbling like angry drums, the lightning flashing jagged across the sky. But no one came looking for her. No one even knew she was out there, suffering alone, hidden under the cart, in the mud and the cold. Zola spent the darkest night of her life, shivering, scared, and utterly forgotten by the world. The night had grown colder and even more unforgiving, but Baba Themba, a kind and elderly man known across the village for his gentle soul, was still awake. Worried about his animals in the storm, he wrapped himself in a heavy blanket and stepped outside to check on his goats and cows. The wind howled past him, pulling at his clothes, and the rain blurred his vision. As he walked carefully through the muddy fields, making sure everything was safe, a faint sound caught his ear, a soft, broken sob, almost too quiet to notice over the roar of the storm. Baba Themba stopped in his tracks, listening closely. Again, the faint sound floated through the night, carried by the rain and wind. His heart tightened. It was the sound of a child crying. Without a second thought, he turned toward the noise, his feet moving quickly across the slippery ground. The crying led him past the fields and toward the old abandoned cart near the edge of the village. As he approached, he lowered himself to the ground, peering into the dark, cramped space underneath. There, curled up into a tiny ball, was Zola. Her small body was soaked to the bone, her dress clinging to her skin, her face pale and almost lifeless. Her lips trembled uncontrollably, and her eyes fluttered weakly, barely able to stay open. Baba Themba gasped, his heart breaking at the sight. He recognized her immediately, the quiet little girl with sad eyes, the one everyone whispered about. the one who was always working alone while other children played. He knelt down, speaking softly, trying to comfort her, but Zola could barely respond. Her tiny body shook with violent shivers, and she seemed on the edge of losing consciousness. Without wasting another moment, Baba Themba pulled off his thick coat and wrapped it gently around her fragile frame. She was so cold, it felt like he was holding a bird made of ice. Carefully, he lifted her into his strong arm, shielding her as best he could from the rain. Her head fell weakly against his shoulder, but she was breathing, just barely. As he stood, he called out loudly into the night, shouting for help. His voice echoed through the storm, reaching the nearby houses. Lights flickered on in the distance as a few curious neighbors opened their doors, hearing the urgency in his voice. Baba Themba moved as quickly as his old legs could carry him, cradling Zola tightly against his chest. Neighbors rushed toward him, their faces filled with confusion and concern. When they saw the little girl in his arms, some gasped, some covered their mouths in shock. Whispers filled the air. "Is that Zola? What happened? Who could do this to a child?" But Baba Themba didn't stop to explain. His only thought was to get her to warmth, to safety, to life. As he hurried through the rain, he whispered to the fragile girl in his arms, promising her softly, "You're safe now, little one. I've got you. You're not alone anymore." By the time the sun began to rise, the storm had finally ended, but the village of Mbali was far from calm. Word had spread like wildfire. Everyone had heard how little Zola, the sweet, quiet girl, had been found half dead under a broken cart in the freezing rain. Mothers whispered the news to each other with tears in their eyes. Fathers clenched their fists in anger, and children who once played without worry now looked around with sad, confused faces. It didn't take long before a large crowd gathered outside Tendai's house, their faces dark with fury and heartbreak. Tendai heard the noise before she even opened her door, the heavy murmuring of an angry crowd, the sharp cries for justice. When she finally stepped outside, she put on her best face, acting confused and innocent. She raised her voice, shouting to the villagers that Zola had run away after being scolded, that they had searched for her, but she had disappeared into the storm. Tendai spun her lies quickly, her words smooth and practiced. She spoke of Zola as if she were a wild child, difficult and stubborn, someone who chose her own fate. But the villagers were not fools. They had seen Zola's tiny body wrapped in Baba Themba's coat. They had seen the bruises on her arms, the cuts on her bare feet, the terror still frozen in her wide eyes. They had heard her weak cries during the night, the way she clung to Baba Themba like he was the only safe thing in the world. No child ran away from love. No child ended up like that, unless someone had broken them first. The villagers looked at Tendai and saw past her false words. They saw the truth, written in Zola's broken body. Murmurs turned to angry shouts. "How could you do this? She's just a child. We trusted you." One by one, villagers began to step forward, speaking up about times they had seen Zola working too hard, looking too thin, crying quietly when she thought no one was watching. Stories that once seemed too small to mention now formed a terrible picture when put together. The truth had been hiding in plain sight all along, and now no one could unsee it. For the first time, Zola's pain was not invisible. Her suffering, which she had carried in silence for so long, now belonged to the whole village. They felt it burning in their hearts, heavy and shameful. Tendai's lies crumbled under their furious eyes. Justice had awakened, and so had the hearts of those who should have protected her from the very beginning. As the angry voices filled the air, a hush suddenly fell over the crowd when Mama Nomsa stepped forward. She was an old widow, with silver hair wrapped neatly in a cloth and deep lines of sorrow and strength carved into her face. Years ago, she had lost her only daughter to sickness, and though time had passed, the emptiness in her heart had never fully healed. Now, as she looked at the broken little girl cradled in Baba Themba's arms, something inside her stirred with powerful love and fierce protection. Tears filled her eyes, and her voice, though trembling, rang out clearly above the silence. "I will be her mother now," she said, her hands reaching out gently. "No child deserves to be alone. No child should suffer like this." The villagers, already burning with guilt and anger, felt a wave of relief and hope at Mama Nomsa's words. Baba Themba, still holding Zola close, looked at Mama Nomsa and nodded with deep respect. Slowly, carefully, He placed Zola into her waiting arms. Mama Nomsa held the little girl against her chest, wrapping her tightly in the warmth of her shawl. Zola was still weak, her small body trembling. But when she felt Mama Nomsa's arms around her, strong, steady, and full of kindness, something deep inside her shifted. For the first time in what felt like forever, Zola wasn't scared of being touched. She didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She simply let herself be held. The crowd watched in silence, many wiping tears from their eyes. Some of the women moved closer, offering blankets, warm broth, and soft words of comfort. Baba Themba placed a gentle hand on Zola's damp hair, whispering a blessing. The other villagers, who once ignored the silent cries of the little barefoot girl, now stood as witnesses to her new beginning. They had failed her before, but now they were determined to make things right. Mama Nomsa carried Zola to her small, cozy home at the edge of the village. The fire was already burning in the hearth, the warm scent of herbs and wood smoke filling the air. She laid Zola carefully on a soft sleeping mat, wrapped her in dry blankets, and stroked her hair until she finally drifted into a deep, peaceful sleep. As she slept, the heavy lines of worry slowly faded from her small face, replaced by something new, a tiny, fragile hope. That night, Zola didn't sleep under a broken cart. She didn't cry herself into exhaustion. She slept in a real home, with a real mother, under the watchful eyes of people who finally saw her for who she truly was, a precious child who deserved love, safety, and happiness. In Mama Nomsa's arms, Zola had found more than just shelter. She had found a family, a new beginning, and for the first time in years, her little heart whispered the words she thought she would never feel again. I am safe. The next day, the village elders and the chief gathered everyone under the old baobab tree. Tendai was brought forward to face judgment. The villagers, still hurt and angry, formed a big circle around her. No one spoke kindly. No one smiled. It was time to face the truth. Witness after witness stood up. They told the elders what they had seen. Baba Themba spoke first, telling how he found Zola half dead in the rain, with bruises and cuts all over her small body. Other villagers spoke about the times they saw Zola working too hard, too hungry, and too lonely. Some remembered how Tendai's real daughters laughed and played while Zola worked in torn clothes without shoes. Every story was another wound against Tendai's name. Tendai tried to defend herself. She claimed that Zola was a troublemaker, that she was only trying to teach her discipline, but no one believed her lies anymore. The bruises on Zola's body, the fear in her eyes, and the kindness of Baba Themba and Mama Nomsa spoke louder than Tendai's words. When the chief asked Tendai's daughters to speak, they stayed silent. They looked down at the ground, ashamed. They didn't try to protect their mother. Their silence said everything. Even they knew that what Tendai did was wrong. The chief listened carefully to everyone. Then he stood and spoke. He declared that Tendai had brought great shame to herself, to her family, and to the whole village. He said that there was no place in Mbali for someone who hurt a helpless child. As punishment, Tendai would be banished forever. She would never be allowed to live among them again. She would leave that day, alone, with nothing. Tendai fell to her knees and begged for mercy. She cried. She promised to change, but it was too late. The villagers turned their backs on her. The same way she had turned her back on Zola in the cold rain, the village now turned their backs on her cruelty. She had no friends left. She had no family willing to stand by her. The villagers watched as Tendai was led away. She disappeared down the dusty road, with no home, no welcome, and no forgiveness. Her own daughters stayed behind, choosing their village over their mother's cruelty. Tendai's name would be remembered, but not with honor, with sadness and anger. Zola, safe in Mama Nomsa's home, slept peacefully, unaware that justice had finally been served. The village, once silent to her suffering, had spoken clearly at last. They had chosen to protect the innocent. They had chosen to right their wrong. And from that day forward, the story of Zola would be one of hope, not pain. Life changed completely for Zola after she came under Mama Nomsa's care. In the warmth of a real home, her small body and broken heart slowly began to heal. Mama Nomsa fed her good meals, wrapped her in soft clothes, and tucked her into bed every night with gentle words and warm hugs. Zola, who once lived with fear, now woke up to kindness. Day by day, her wounds faded, her spirit grew stronger, and the sad emptiness in her eyes was replaced by a spark of hope. Slowly, her soft smile returned, a smile that many had never seen before. Mama Nomsa also made sure Zola went to school with the other village children. At first, Zola was shy and nervous, afraid that others would laugh at her, but the children welcomed her with open arms. They played games, shared their lunches, and helped her catch up in her lessons. Zola learned how to read and write, and for the first time, she realized she was smart and capable. Her teachers praised her, and her classmates looked up to her. She wasn't just a poor girl anymore. She was someone important, someone loved. As the years passed, Zola grew into a strong, kind-hearted young woman. She never forgot the pain of being alone and mistreated. That memory pushed her to dream bigger. When she finished her studies, she returned to her village as a teacher. She made it her mission to protect children who had no voice, just like she once had none. In her classroom, no child was ever left behind, no cry ever ignored. She taught with patience, with love, and with the belief that every child deserved a chance to shine. People from nearby villages heard about the young teacher with the bright smile and powerful heart. They sent their children to learn from her. Zola's small classroom became a place of laughter, dreams, and hope. She became more than just a teacher. She became a hero. The barefoot girl, who had once shivered alone in the rain, now stood tall, respected by everyone. At night, around the fires in the villages, old and young would tell the story of the little girl who had suffered so much, but rose higher than anyone ever expected. They told the story of Zola, the forgotten flower who bloomed into a shining light for others. Her journey from tears to triumph reminded everyone that even the smallest, most broken heart could grow strong with love, courage, and a second chance.